Okay, let's move on to the tags. Most of this stuff should have been processed during the production stage, but there's a lot of similarities in what I would do in this section as I did with the bass section. But I'm just going to kind of quickly breeze through everything. And again, after looking through all these little aspects, it's all minor, small things just like before. So these are your tags. These are like your call and response. These are what help your production or your sound or your section sound interesting. Let's just play this one section real quick. Okay, so small things you might notice right off the bat, like this being pushed 3 milliseconds out of the way. Let's see why that causes for that. That's what I figured. It's a small little thing to accent on the snare, but I don't want it on the actual hit of the snare. I want it to be the hit of the snare, and then we want to move on to the sound, but we're going to push it away using our delay in time, so that helps breathe and make space for that hit. I think one of the more important things is this sound right here. And what we have here is I'm using a widener. I probably don't need both of these, but this one's doing very, very little. But this has a reverb after it, so check this out. So that reverb is actually a really important part of the song, but I don't want it to get in the way of my main bass or other instruments when they come in, which is going to be the next hit, this hit, and then this bass line when it comes in as well. So what's happening here? We're using this widener because I just wanted to have a little bit more tone and texture than the S1, which we already demonstrated earlier. Actually has a cleaner sound, but this is stylistically okay. So let's play this back and let's see what this is doing just in this section after the hit and to the reverb. So we can all hear that when this reverb tails off, and I'm using spaced out, I didn't recommend it because it's kind of a weird reverb. I have it on the actual sound, and I mean, it sounds good. You could use whatever reverb you want. I don't personally recommend this, though I do use this all the time. It's just a little different sounding of a reverb, but it's cool for me at least. So you don't have to worry about this reverb. It could be any reverb. But the point of it is the tail of the reverb is not sitting in the middle. It's getting spaced out after. And I'm spacing it out all the way. And we're doing our due diligence here because we don't want it to have any low end after the fact, like the reverb might carry out a low end. These are typical mix things. So we talked about having one low end. So when this sound plays, this is off, so that the low end is coming from this sound. But then the second that sound, the feature of that sound is over, we could kick on our EQ, cutting out the low end. The more automation you have amongst all your sounds like this, the better. You need to look at every single aspect of your song and every single sound in order to get the mix that you're looking for. Let's see what this one's doing. Okay. So not only are we cutting out the low end at this point in the song, but we're also taming the highs. That makes a lot of sense. What we don't want is for that ear or our ear to hear the reverb of this after. We just want it to be there, but not the focus. The focus is this next sound here. That's the focus at that point. So let's listen to these two sounds together. So you can clearly hear the reverb, and let me move this. You can clearly hear the reverb out, but our ear goes right to that right after. Let's hear it one more time. It's almost as if the reverb is not there. Let's see what happens if I just turn this reverb off. One more time. That's whack, right? So we need this. All right. And if I were to just look at some of these extra sounds, these are not important really, because these are things, again, these are production things using Rift here again. This is just taming and sound shaping this particular sound. Let's just take a listen, just in case you guys are curious. Without. Okay, now let's listen to it with and then without it on solo. Got it. So it really just seems like I wanted the bass or the kick drum to be the focus here, and I didn't want this to be too big. Let's hear it without. So I'm just balancing out the sound. I don't know if you guys noticed, but when I didn't have this on, it just sounded too high and piercy. The low end here, I'm cutting it out probably just because I want the next hit. That's the only thing I can think of. I want the next hit to have more of the beef and the gas. So this is again, it could be a mixed thing, but it's more of a production thing if you ask me, to have the low end be less right before the turn on a drop section. So I guess that's something you can definitely take away from this. Is it's just like when you're doing a build up into your song, like I think the drop starts right here, right? Yeah, so this would be the drop. You don't want a huge low end right here, because you want when this part comes in, this is our main bass, right? Our first hit is like right here. We want that to have the biggest impact. And I think we can all feel that. So that's what I'm doing right here. That's why the EQ is cutting out that low end. Let's move on. Oh, also this is Replica. I favor a bunch of plugins that I'm not recommending to you, like this one. I think this is a free one. I'm not sure. It's just a delay. It just sounds good. I like things that have a good sound spectrum. This is more of the same stuff. I don't need to unfreeze this and show you. This is just general compression. This is a phaser and an EQ. We're doing the same thing we just did with this one here, where we're cutting the highs. It's the same sort of thing. We're just cutting the highs in certain places where it needs it. This phaser is just a tonal thing, just so that it sounds a certain way. This is not necessarily a mix thing. It's a production thing. Let's go on to here, because I didn't want to make this section too crazy. The one thing that I would say about your tags is I want the tags to be in a wider spot in the spectrum than the draw or the main bass. I want the main bass to be more focused. And how do we make things more focused? We have them more towards the center. So let's go ahead and let's take this right here and let's just solo this whole group. This is going to have everything in it. Again, notice we're pushing everything 3 milliseconds, the entire tag section, and this green one here, 25, is our bass. We'll just call it like that. Okay, let's just take a listen to this section real quick, and it's going to be tags and then the bass line, and let's just see where they sit in this spectrum right here. Coolsies. So anytime that the tags hit, we can see, I'm going to move this over for you. They were wider in the spectrum, and then whenever the bass hits, it's a little bit more focused. It's like these little candies, like wah, and then we're like ba 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 right in the middle, ba ba ba, and then wah on the side. It's like a little surprise. This is gonna make things not seem stale. So how do we do this? You can do it when you're doing your production, when you're making your sounds, and you widen each one individually, which I did. But I also did stuff like put a reverb on top of the entire tag section. Now this is such a light reverb, you probably won't even notice. It's small, and I just wanted to seem just a little tiny bit more wet. I sometimes do these types of things just because if things sound too dry, it doesn't sound real to me. Because like even in the room I'm in right now, it's not dead silent. There's a little bit of acoustics happening, in this room. It's just something that I like. I'm sure other producers like the same thing. So we're giving it a little bit of wetness. It's such a small amount. I'll let you hear that now, with and without. Very slight, you guys. Now, this comb filter, we didn't go over the comb filter before. Let me pull up what this is actually doing. So this is pretty self-explanatory. It's just creating peaks and valleys in different places and different frequency ranges to give you an essential, more desirable sound. Okay, so the way that this one works is you pick the frequency range that you're looking to set the comb filter to, and then you just kind of, for me, like, I just use my ear, and then you can assume that if this is plus and minus, it's boosting or it's cutting those frequencies, the focus frequencies. So I'll let you hear this with and without. Sounds very similar. It's hard to put it into words, but sometimes when I feel like it needs something, but it doesn't need more distortion or more reverb or delay, I always go for a comb filter because it's kind of a weird filter to use. So that's why I use that. So this is probably something you're not going to use when it comes to mixing. So I don't want to stick around and linger on this too much. All right, Spiff. This again is probably one of the flagship tools. You can get away with doing a lot of mixing with this tool right here. Let's check it out. Okay, cool. So this is giving us that punch that we're looking for around that 2K, 1K area. Remember in the drum section, let's go back here for a second, and we talked about Spiff and how it works. But remember we dipped this area here? We dipped this because the drums don't need to have that much focus there, because our kick and our clap are sitting here and here. So I'm just making space for our lead sounds here, and I'm using Spiff to emphasize those sounds. So everything's a balancing act. If you don't need a certain frequency range in a certain instrument, you can dip that down. And I could have also sidechained. I could have also used the sidechain in here, right? But I like the way the drums sound when I scoop this anyways. That's why it's internal. I could have set this to external and then routed this into this plugin to give us more of a sidechain effect on those frequencies, but I just didn't do that. Doesn't matter. Didn't need to do it because I liked the way the sound of the drums were when I scooped that out anyways. But because that frequency range is lacking in the drums now, it's okay for us to give a punch or a boost in this general area so that it fills that void. Something to think about when you're balancing out your sounds. If you don't need a frequency range in one instrument, it might be a good idea in another instrument to boost those frequencies in that range. Again, we've already talked about Spiff and what it does. It's like a transient push. That's what we're doing here. Again, acoustic bass mid knock. This is a preset somewhere within here I had found that sounded cool. Not trying to make my life difficult by spending hours on Spiff, and you should not either. This is just going to be some volume automation. So I didn't want to go, or I did, but I didn't want to necessarily just rely on our shaper box here, which is going to be our side chain. So at some point I literally manually went in here, and I think it's just because I really wanted to make sure we're not losing or we're not giving any of this sound any kind of focus over the kick. Let's hear what this sounds like with and without this utility. Yeah, I can definitely tell that when I have this off, the kick is there. It's perfectly audible, but the focus is not the kick in that one split instant. It's actually our main hit. That's really where the ear is going to. This is a gate. Let's see what this is doing and how this is helping our sound. Okay, so you can hear the sound lingering just a little bit. This is very slight. This is slight stuff, but I'm hearing a big difference in the overall grand scheme of things. Once this sound, the frequencies drop below this minus 33, it cuts the sound. And that's, I guess, what sounded and worked the best with the rest of the instruments. I definitely recommend trying to use gates, especially if you're using reverbs and stuff like that, so you can control the point in which the sound stops, allowing the frequencies of the other sounds, like the bass, to come and be more upfront. So throw a gate on sounds wherever you need them. You could even do it, this kind of gating situation, on the main bass if you really wanted to. Let's just say this sound was not ending quite where you wanted to here. You can throw a gate on this, and this is going to help so that every time it drops below a certain level, like right here, it'll stop the sound. That's the whole point of a gate. I don't know if you guys knew that. Okay, so here's our mid side EQ for this instrument. If you don't know what mid side is, let's just break it down really quick, because I don't want anyone to miss any of these things. I feel like everything that I've been covering is really simple stuff. Everybody should be able to understand what I'm talking about, because we're not breaking any new ground here. I'm just telling you what are the most common things that happen in a song. So I'm going to play this song right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to set it to mid, and I'm going to bring it across, and we're going to see what that means. And just use your ears and we'll talk about it. Okay, so what is happening here is you have a middle and you have a side of your speaker. Okay, what does that mean? The middle of your speaker is all this stuff that happens right here. So okay, did you see how I switched this? I put the imager actually after the Pro Q, and then you saw all the middle frequencies disappear here, and it was just the wide speaker. So, I mean, I don't want to baby you guys. I know you guys probably know what this stuff kind of means, but what we're doing is we're cutting not the mids in the sense of the mids being right here. It's the middle of your speaker, like the mono frequencies of your speaker, versus the wide stereo sounds of your speaker. Let's take a listen to that. I'm going to bring this back, and then I'm going to switch it to stereo or sides. So what I'm doing in this scenario over here, I hope that clears it up. I feel like that's the only way to explain it. Middle and the side of the speaker. So there's 4 different ways that you can EQ your sound. You have the middle, you have the sides, you have the stereo spectrum, which is both the middle, the sides, the left and right all together, or you can also do left and right, so which would be the left speaker and the right speaker. Let me change this real quick to a bell. So you could probably hear the sound go from your left ear or your right ear to your left ear. There's a lot of cool things you can do with left and right. I've played with all of them. Okay. Some people are like, oh yeah, when you make the left speaker sound EQ'd a little bit tiny different than the right speaker, it makes it wider. All of this stuff is definitely true. It just depends on your taste and what you need to do for your song. For this song in particular, it being a house EDM song, mid side is good. You don't have to do a bunch of like right and left, all that. You don't have to get crazy. You just need to make stuff sound good, because at the end of the day, the people that are listening to your music are just trying to party. They're not critiquing the song as much as somebody that's listening to, like, I don't know, The Weeknd, and they're listening for the actual song. Does that make sense? So I guess I'm saying you could be a little bit lazy in different places. I'm not recommending you to be lazy. I'm just saying you can. So in this scenario right here, what we're doing here is I'm going to the mid. You can see right here I'm in the middle instead of the sides. That's the side. And we're doing just a pull down here of 1.3 dB and 90 hertz. Let's take a listen to that. So when I was mixing this, my theory behind this was these frequencies here, I want to be stronger in this bass section. So I didn't want the first hits to be as big as this bass section. Yet again, it's kind of like what we talked about with this sound here, where we cut out the low end right before this drop section came back in. This is the turn, and then we want the next section to be a little bit bigger, but then we want the main sound to be the full beast of it all. So that's why we are globally cutting in all the tags this frequency, because this is a prominent frequency range for the bass. We want it to be stronger and more focused in the bass, so that when the bass is in, you're like, shit, yeah, that sounds amazing. Looks like we're doing it even more at a different frequency range. Before we were doing at 100 hertz lower, and I'm doing it more here. Another thing you guys need to do commonly over your sounds is cutting the highs. Let's take a listen to this with and without. So I'm not hearing a huge difference, but I know for a fact that in the grand scheme of things, when you're mastering the song and your instruments have too much high end in it, it's going to be more apparent in the master. It's going to just bring those things out. And naturally, people want to hear a warm, lush, vibier sound than a very top endy and harsh sound. So this is me just trying to protect everybody's ears, making it nice, knowing that in the final result, it'll do better that way. Here we got the shaper box. Same stuff here. It looks like the curve on this is a little bit different than the one on the main bass. That's okay. Again, we're only doing it to the low end frequency. If you look at the bottom, we're cutting it at 122 hertz. And the top end, we're not touching because we just don't need to. Moving on. Okay. This is the last little piece here of the tags, and all this is a side chain for whenever the main bass comes in. We are side chaining all this low end out. This is me protecting our sound. So we have a womp womp, right? We have two sounds that come in, three sounds, boom boom boom. then our bass comes in, right? And I need these sounds to linger because I don't want them to have a short life. Remember, we spread out one of these sounds. I think it was this one, right? We spread it out with the whitener and it lingers. And we even cut the low end. But I just want to make sure, like this right here, this represents like lingering tones. And I don't want any lingering sound, but I do at the same time. So I guess what I'm saying is I want the sound to linger so it's a nice flow of sound, but I don't want it to linger in the low end. So instead of going to each instrument and cutting out the low end at the appropriate time with an EQ, I'm just doing with the sidechain. Very simple. Let's take a listen. We're just going to listen to the entire drop group. Now let's hear it without. I can tell even in my headphones, which are actually really cheap, crappy headphones for this tutorial recording, I can tell that the low end or the bass becomes more focused in especially the low end, but just in focus more in general when I have that on. It's just a small thing. It's these very small things that add everything up to make your song the best it can. Like the frequencies that need to be shining at that time are the frequencies we need to be hearing. So that's something you can do. Again, we've heard what all of these things do. They are also applied to these tags. The all these tags, like they don't need to be crazy. They're just small little like ear candies. The first hit is important. The whomp, that's important for sure. But all of this stuff here, we've already gone through it. I'm not going to go through it again because I don't want to waste your guys' time. I know this tutorial is probably longer than it needs to be, but if you're sitting in your session right now, pause this video, go to your drop section or any section. This can apply to any section. And it doesn't have to be EDM. That's one thing I should have mentioned earlier. This can apply to anything that you're doing. This could be a fill in a hip-hop song. It could be any song you're doing. All of this stuff I'm showing you applies. So go to your song right now, turn off the drums, listen to just your drop, and then solo the main instrument, solo the secondary instruments, see what their EQs are doing, and then adjust accordingly like I did here. And then everything else is going to be easier for you. The mastering process is going to be fun. You don't need to do extra layering. You'll be able to hear your sounds better. So hopefully this helps. I want to wrap this up and then we're going to move on to the next section. I wanted to talk about one thing, in my opinion, that makes this song really work. And that's this section, this part right here. I'm going to turn it off real quick and we're going to play it from here. So in my opinion, this section would suck without this sound in it. All right, so what's going on? Nothing's happening with this thing. It's not even on, okay? This, spiff, normal stuff. We only want to do it to the high register because we don't care about the low end. This is not a low end instrument. It's not the focus. We don't care about the low end. What we're doing is we're actually cutting. So let's listen to this sound with and without this. Very subtle difference. And then we're just doing some light compression here. And you can see what it's doing there. It's just flattening everything out. So I'm going to just revert back here. So something like this, if your drop is lacking something, oftentimes you might find yourself putting on more plugins to your main bass. Maybe it needs to sound more distorted. Maybe it needs to have another layer. Well, technically this is another layer, but the layer is not important. It's just adding something to make this whole section groove together. And I've personally found in-house music, and this can work for hip-hop, anything. This could be an arpeggiator. It could be anything that kind of floats around, that isn't the focus of the ear, but makes the sound or the section sound more interesting. This is kind of a production thing, but this is also something that you can do when you're mixing. Let's just say there's a vocal that comes in, which there is one here. It comes in, and then in that vocal, you delay it out in a way that's rhythmic to the song that helps the section when it comes into it. Just something to think about. But again, the most important part to remember is we're not using any low end here. It's just a nice wide sounding sound that helps the section sound cooler. As a matter of fact, let's look at the sound spectrum on that before we move on. Exactly. We want this to be wide, not interfering with our main instrument, which is going to be in the middle. It's even wider than the tags. And this is like something that the ear hears, but doesn't necessarily acknowledge right away as far as the main sound goes. It's tucked down below the other sounds. It's just a vibe. And that's the most important thing that I was trying to put on to you guys at the very beginning, is like, just create a vibe and people will like your song. All right, let's jump into the next section, and we'll keep this going.